All right. Metallica is always seek and destroy. Bringing in your Wednesday edition, 5 o'clock hour, Eastern Standard, that's PM, of Discussions of Truth. I am your host on a weekly basis, Ian Hamilton Trottier. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Retweet me. Make a comment. Tag a friend. Ian Trottier, that's IANTROTTIER. Both on Twitter and on Instagram. We are pleased, as always, to broadcast from Wynwood Radio in Miami, Florida. Donate to Wynwood Radio. Make a donation. WynwoodRadio.com, internet radio station. Donate to Discussions of Truth. And you can do that at iantrottier.com, IANTROTTIER.com. Impeach Mass Media. Type that into your browser. Impeach Mass Media. What do I mean by that? What I mean is fair and balanced Fox News may not be all that it's touted to be. MSNBC, CNN. Ever wonder why you can always find a monitor with the CNN news running at any U.S. airport? Now, I haven't been to all U.S. airports. I've been to a few, and I've always found a CNN news broadcast live at an airport. You think your media is not tainted? I'm glad you're in that place. But the fact that you're listening to me shows that you question that stance. And the more that I look into various matters in our free country, the more that I realize that the powers that be, which means the powers that collect most of your taxes and collect the rewards off of your hard work that you put in on a daily basis, 9 to 5, enjoy you sitting on that couch potato watching the boob tube. Because you're not getting, most likely, the accurate information on what's really going on with your constitutional rights. All I do is create a platform for folks that know a lot more about these subjects than I, and most likely you, to come on and speak their mind and speak their experience. And that's why I'm pleased to announce that next week we will be hosting author Ilana Freeland. She's the author of her, the most recent book, Under an Ionized Sky. Quote, upon returning from a few years in England, I moved back to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I had gotten a master's degree at St. John's College. Knowing of the massive research I had been pursuing for a decade for my Sub Rosa America history series, a friend introduced me to an independent scientist, Clifford Carnicom, who, in 2006, was still deeply engaged in collecting and measuring what had been falling from airplanes. Chemicals that had been falling from airplanes and leaving trails that look like condensation trails, but aren't. Over northern New Mexico. And as you've most likely heard on this program, Dane Wigington experiences it firsthand in the Shasta Mountains of Northern California. So it's not just confined to New Mexico. And it's not just confined to California. So Clifford Carnicom had been studying this since the 1990s. And Ilana approached him in 2006. When Clifford took her aside and said, Ilana, quote, under Clifford's microscope, she says, I watched the mortgagons, I'm not sure the pronunciation of that word is, the mortgagons pathogen suck iron out of my red blood cells. Does that sound like that's a good thing? It sounds like it's not a good thing to me. And we'll hear more about what she knows about that, because it's caused her, 12 years later, to write this book, Under an Ionized Sky. So does a statement alarm you? Is it alarming? Yes, it's an alarming statement. So we'll backtrack a little bit in Ilana's life and what she had done since she was in high school. In 1963, Ilana was elected by Girls State to be a representative at Girls Nation, American Legion Auxiliary, Washington, D.C. The same year, Bill Clinton, and you recognize that name most likely because he was the former president of the United States, he happened to represent Arkansas as a high school student for something called Boys State. So back in 63, she and Bill Clinton seemingly must cross paths through an American Legion auxiliary program called Girls Nation and Boys Nation. Well, in the Rose Garden at the White House, having tea with the then U.S. President John F. Kennedy, Ilana was put into the spotlight. So here she's got a young encounter as a high school student with, obviously she has no clue that Bill Clinton would go on to become a U.S. president, but here she is as a high school student having an encounter with quite possibly one of the most incredible U.S. presidents of the history of this country. Most people think of JFK very fondly. And John F. Kennedy points her out as a high school student. This is Ilana Freeland. And he says, you remind me of a young version of my wife, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. So imagine having that encounter with JFK, a high school student. Pretty cool, right? Pretty incredible. It seems like he thought highly of her. 3 months later, he would get his head blown off. In Dallas, Texas. So we go from that to Under an Ionized Sky and what she has studied in HARP, the Strategic Defense Initiative, and what some folks call chemtrails. We like to refer to those as geoengineering. And I'm going to tout geoengineeringwatch.org for Dane, because I fully support what he's doing. I support it. If you are going to look into anything that you find questionable in the going-ons of your local government, your state, federal, whatever it may be, I support you. Look, whether your findings are accurate or not, the fact that you've got a hunch and you're going down the path to prove it either right or wrong, I support that. Same thing why I've had on people to talk about 9/11. I support the fact that they question a narrative. I support that. I wasn't there in New York. I'm not in the U.S. government. Never been in the military. I'm just your average, everyday American citizen. And I love this country. And I love the fact that we are different from any other country on this planet. And that we can speak our minds. And we can voice our opinion. And I can go down to the corner, or I can go down to the town square, and I can stand on a soapbox, and I can say whatever I want. And that's my right, and I support that. Now, what we look for on this program is to find accuracy and truth. That's what we strive to do on Discussions of Truth here at Winwood Radio. So Lana will join us next week. Cody Snodgrass will be joining us in October. And I've got a couple other guests that have confirmed, but Cody is a former Black Ops specialist, and he's got a very interesting story. Okay? If the guests that come on this program give us inaccuracies, that's their issue. That's their problem. It's our job to snuff it out, and to snuff out any inaccuracy that might be happening in mass media. Okay? The hashtag fake news isn't viral for no reason. There is misinformation and disinformation running rampant. September 19th, former JAG lawyer and retired CIA operations officer Sam Faddis is scheduled to join the program. Beyond Repair, The Decline and Fall of the CIA is the title of his most recent book. And speaking of books, I want to tout my own, which I have named. Currently, it continues with this name, Freedom Reserved. No more lies. What do I mean by that? What I mean is it's your job. You're the reserved. We are the reserved group of Americans, or wherever you may be in the world, to take authority and those that should be questioned because they're working for us, if you're in the United States. Now, if you're in the UK, you're working for the Queen, arguably. Well, you didn't elect her. We march to a different drum in the United States, don't we? And we elect. That means we submit votes. Majority rule. That's who we work for. People that we put in office. And if that's not happening, then there's an infringement. And our inalienable rights, well, I use that term loosely, but constitutional rights nonetheless. Take them to task because they are working for you. It's we, the people. No more lies. The title of my current book. And a pretty good deal. $8.99, I think it is, on Lulu. That's a nice, decent price for a quick read that'll probably take you half a day. You can sit down before you go to bed and you can read through it. If you're a quick read, you can do that. A lot of good information in there that basically gives you a glimpse at the path that I've walked the past 2 years since the Zika virus came ashore in Miami, Florida. And a small group of folks were up in hands and irate because that chemical that was used, known as Dibrom, nail it's got some other retail names, was banned and is banned in the European Union. So the scream was, why is it being used here? If it's a known neurotoxin and deemed poisonous in Europe, why was it permitted to be used here in Florida? And that is what set me off and caused me to arrive here today to present to you No More Lies, Freedom Reserved, No More Lies, which, by the way, has a couple of different people looking at to get published. I published it myself, so regard, doesn't matter. And hosting Lieutenant Colonel Robert Buzz Patterson, who'll be joining Winwood Radio here in a few moments. So who is Buzz? Why is he relevant? Because he's a faithful, honest servant to his country. And as every great military man or woman or personnel should be, completely transparent, truthful, and honest. And he's got a story to tell about his time with the Clintons. He served in the United States Air Force, former military combat pilot, distinguished White House military aide, best-selling author, New York Times, two books, New York Times best-selling author, leadership consultant, popular public speaker, and former commercial airline pilot for Delta. Among Patterson's literary efforts include, again, New York Times bestsellers Dereliction of Duty and Reckless Disregard. He's a native of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, distinguished graduate from the Air Command and Staff College. He's got a bachelor's degree in political science from Virginia Tech and a master's in business administration from Webster State in St. Louis, Missouri. He and his family currently reside in California. From 1996 to 1998, Colonel Patterson was a military aide to President Bill Clinton. During that time, he served at the right hand of Mr. President and Mrs. Clinton, and was responsible for the president's emergency satchel, otherwise known as the nuclear football, the black bag with the nation's nuclear capability that accompanies the president at all times. Buzz was in charge of that. So through Buzz's veins ran the blood and the heartbeat to your protection if you lived in the U.S. Yeah, regardless of where you lived, really. That's a global issue. As such, Patterson had an office and a bedroom in the White House and accompanied the first family at all times. In addition, Colonel Patterson was operational commander for all military units assigned to the White House, which included Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David, and the White House Transportation Agency. Buzz Patterson frequently lectures at schools such as UC Berkeley, Gonzaga University, University of North Carolina, St. Louis University, Pepperdine University, UCSB, that would be Santa Barbara, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, and the Richard M. Nixon Presidential Library, and to the United States Congress. He has made appearances on the following television programs: Hannity, The O'Reilly Factor, CBS Morning Show, Fox and Friends, Hardball with Chris Matthews, Dennis Miller's show, C-SPAN's, Book Notes, and MSNBC News. He has also appeared on radio programs hosted by Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Michael Savage, Lars Larson, Hugh Hewitt, and Discussion of Truth shortly with Ian Trottier. Dereliction of duty is a specific offense under United States Title 10, Section 892, Article 92, and applies to all branches of the U.S. military. That's a pretty big deal. We will be right back with Buzz Aldrin.
With all those sins, I watch you sleep. Hard to me. Grab a whip, use my strength. Try to fight, can't run away. Run away, run away. Jasmine in my bathroom sing, I know you ain't leaving yet. Every time it feels like it, we gravitate. But I'm just trying to feel it out. Touch you and reanimate this flame, because these candles lit. Can't let these seconds go to waste. I'll tell you what the wise man said. Don't make a fire if you can't handle it. This the part when the heart starts shifting. This the part when the love don't miss it. This the part. This the part. Quiet kisses, your facade has subsided. Don't mind the lines divided. Mesmerize it. I watch them twist and turn. Scars and little burns, you twitch, I get excited. I see between your eyes and mine, as vivid as my life is. Thighs of a little girl that don't know their price yet. Your essence on my tongue, babe. I slowly digest. My body's lifeless and lit. Without your touch, my lovely Isis. My lovely Isis. Iris of this little boy that say don't know Christ yet. Pulled down by the vices, they hold them like a vice grip. Yeah. So save some blessings for my soul, babe. Save some blessings for my soul, babe. Don't let me go, babe. Don't let me.
All right, little Phantom Lord Metallica. We have with us online former Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Air Force, right-hand man to Mr. Bill Clinton. He held the nuclear football for a couple of years, basically protecting you and I as we didn't know it. Buzz Patterson. Buzz, can you hear me?
Got you loud and clear, Ian. How about me?
I hear you loud and clear, sir. And you call us, or rather we call you from Miami. You are in California, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah, just outside of Los Angeles.
All right, and so how's the weather today?
You know what? It's been brutally hot, Ian, but today is actually pretty nice. We had a little cool off today, but we've been actually, LA is experiencing some hotter than normal temperatures. We actually hit 115 a couple weeks ago, which is an all-time record. But today is actually very pleasant.
Wait, what is 115 all-time record?
Yeah, in Los Angeles. Yeah, we normally get the ocean breezes here. You know, I'm right off the coast here. Normally you get the ocean breezes and the marine layer in the morning, and it burns off in the afternoon. But about 2 weeks ago, man, it was just brutal. It was 115 one day, 109 the next day, and today it's 85. So today's nice and balmy.
That sounds a little more conducive with the climate that I'm familiar with of Southern California. I lived in Palm Springs. 115, I think, is something you get out there in the Coachella Valley, but like you say, not toward the coastline. That's a little too much.
Yeah, it's the desert. As you know, the desert gets pretty hot. You know, we're probably typically about 20 degrees cooler over here. But that heat wave that came through a couple of weeks ago was brutal, and we all got it. I mean, all the way up the state, went into the desert, up to the Sierras. We're seeing 100 degrees. It was nuts, but it's nice today.
Okay, how long have you been in California?
I moved out here from the East Coast in 2006. My family and I did. I wrote some books. I retired from the Air Force in 2001 after doing the thing with Bill Clinton in the White House. Started writing books, best-selling books about what I'd seen in the White House, and we moved out here. So I lived in Atlanta from 2001 to 2006, and then we moved out here in 2006. I was flying for Delta Airlines for a while as a pilot, and kept writing books, and now I'm doing speaking and writing and blogging and doing media pretty much full time. I was so incensed with Hillary Clinton running again. I couldn't stand to see that happen back in 2006, so I retired from Delta as an airline pilot and got back into doing this, which is nice. I get to be home a lot more and see my kids and my wife. I'm not traveling 3 weeks out of the month, and I'm happy to be. You know, one of these guys in California where this is the heart of the beast. You know, if you're a conservative, Republican, you are in the heart of it out here, especially in Los Angeles. So I'm happy to be out here fighting the fight.
Yeah, I'm actually from Northern California. I understand that you was it Alameda Air Force Base?
No, I was at Travis Air Force Base, kind of northeast of the Bay. And in fact, I married a girl from Chico. So my wife is from Chico, and I lived up in the Fairfield-Vacaville area, flew out of Travis. And in fact, that's where I was, Ian, when the White House called. Funny story, I was a squadron commander in California at Travis Air Force Base, and the White House called in the fall of '95 and said that I was one of 6 that they wanted to interview for the military aide to the President of the United States. I had no idea what that job meant or entailed. I had heard about the nuclear football, but I really wasn't clued into that. I was a pilot, and so I flew out to D.C. in the fall of '95, and Bill Clinton hired me. I started carrying the nuclear football and actually living in the White House. So I had a bedroom and an office in the White House from 1996 to 1998, and saw a lot of crazy things. I mean, I was there during the Monica Lewinsky stuff, Paul Jones, the impeachment. Every day was interesting. It was like, it was kind of you never knew what was going to happen from day to day. So I was by his side. I used to jog with him. I used to go play golf with him and hang out with him when he wasn't being presidential and doing his presidential stuff. So I got to know him and the First Lady pretty well. I saw a lot of things I didn't like about my experience there. So that's why I wrote Dereliction of Duty in 2003 when I retired.
So Buzz, what was it that kind of set you apart for the White House and whoever's making that decision to kind of put you as a candidate? What were you doing? Were you top of your class? What was it? What was it about you?
A little bit of everything. I think that there were, like I said, it's not a job you can apply for. And I was the White House actually went to the Pentagon and said, "Give us 6 nominees," and they picked me as one of 6 because I was a combat pilot. I had been promoted ahead of my peers a few times. I actually had no idea until I got to the White House. And I remember the person that hired me was, at the time, Chief of Staff of the White House, Leon Panetta. And I remember interviewing with Mr. Panetta, and he asked me why I wanted the job. And quite frankly, I was dating my now wife in Northern California and flying around the world, having the time of my life. And I told him, I said, sir, I'm not really sure that I do want the job. You guys called me to come out here. I'm happy to be here, enjoying the experience. And so I thought when I walked out of the White House that day that I had pretty much, shot my, there was no way they were going to hire me. And he called me in my hotel room that night and said, "We'd like to offer you the job to be the president's military aide." And I got to meet President Clinton the next morning, and we were off and running. So to this day, Ian, I have no idea why they selected me, other than the fact that I had I had some combat experience, pretty quick on my feet in terms of operational stuff. Because one of the things about the White House military aide is you're also in charge of all the military assets. So the Air Force One guys work for me, the Marine One guys work for me operationally. All the White House Communications Agency, which people don't realize exists, is about 3,000 military folks that do all of the IT. They do all of the computers, the satellite phones, the everywhere the president goes, they go and set up their own cell phone networks. It's really kind of cosmic stuff. But so all the military people that work for the president actually worked through me operationally. And I think they liked the fact that I had some experience as a commander in the Air Force. I had a lot of folks working for me at the time, and I had just gotten back from combat in Bosnia. So I think that was probably the for me, the tiebreaker with the other guys. I mean, they were all, there was an F-16 Thunderbird pilot was there. I mean, it was just 5 other really, really cool, interesting people the Air Force had sent forward, but they ended up picking me, and my life changed forever.
Yeah. So, all right, so you're in the White House, and what's your first impression of Mr. Clinton?
Well, I remember very distinctly, Ian, the first day I walked into the White House was a spring day in 1996. I remember just thinking, here I am, an Air Force major. It was kind of overwhelming that you're moving into the White House. Basically, you have, like I said, you have an office and you have a bedroom in the White House. And I remember walking down to the Oval Office and meeting Mr. Clinton. And this is honest to God truth. I remember walking to the Oval Office and meeting him. And I stepped back and looked at him. Number one, he's a pretty big man. He doesn't come across on TV that way, but he's a very tall man, and he's got a huge head. And I remember looking at his head and going, "Dude, that is a big melon." I'm meeting the president, and that is a big guy. Very nice. We got along great. When he wasn't being presidential, he's one of those guys, Ian, I tell people that, you want to have him over to your house for a barbecue because he'll tell some great stories and some colorful jokes, but you want to keep him away from your wife and your daughter. And that's the kind of guy President Clinton was. So my first impression was, he's the president. I gotta watch what I do, make sure I don't get him hurt or embarrass him, and just be the military guy for him. And I was able to get through 2 years without screwing anything up.
It sounds good. Now Hillary Clinton's a whole other character, and from the from the perception, Buzz, it's kind of like you can see that the two of them kind of cats and dogs. They get into it, it's certainly Hillary literally wears pants. But you're serving her or them. You're serving Bill. You're there for Bill, not for her. This is back in the mid '90s. What was your impression of the relationship after 2 years of being right next to the president?
You know what? They were night and day, Ian. It was again, being around Bill was comfortable, and for the most part, I mean, there were times when it wasn't cool to be around him, and it was very uncomfortable. But for the most part, he was pretty warm and ingratiating, very gregarious. Now, Hillary, on the other hand, was she was kind of like the Gestapo in the White House. She was just really short. and cold and curt. She, in her defense, she kind of kept the trains running on time. She made sure that Bill was where he was supposed to be, when he was supposed to be there, And I likened it to, I remember I used to tell folks when I was working there that when she wasn't around, the White House was like a frat party. But when she was around, it was a whole different atmosphere. It was like even on Air Force One, we were on Air Force One flying around the world. If she was not there, he was scarfing down, cheeseburgers and Mexican food and barbecue. And when she was on the airplane with us, traveling with the president, it was always vegan food and salads, and so it was it was night and day. She really was never the politician or the personality as we've seen recently that he was, and she was just incapable. He was a quintessential politician for all of his problems and his warts, and I write about him in my books. He was a quintessential politician, and she never had any of that aptitude. She was not a very eloquent speaker, as we all know. He can be. He can be riveting as a speaker, but she's nowhere near that.
So what do you think attracted the two of those personalities early on? What brought them together? What kept them together?
I think it was early on. It was kind of a political expediency thing. She needed some street cred in terms of politics, and he was going to run for governor of Arkansas, and she ended up moving to Arkansas with him, and that kind of went down. And I think later, as the years progressed, and he started having his bimbo eruptions and his scandals, it became more of a business relationship. And in fact, I was there the day Monica Lewinsky situation hit the national press. And I remember thinking very clearly that was when she basically, they had kind of a powwow up in the residence of the White House. And I remember thinking, this is where she's taking over. And she did. She became the co-president, and she told him what to say, when to say it, what not to say. When he came out and said, I did not have sex with that woman, Monica, Mrs. Lewinsky, that was Hillary's words verbatim.
Wow.
So it became a 100% mutual business relationship where she said, I'll stay with you if you stay with me. So he ended up having to, of course, support her, knowing that she was going to run for the Senate and then the presidency at some point. And that's why he still to this day, he's supporting her. But there's no intimacy there, and there's none whatsoever. It's all business.
Do you feel that perhaps the relationship got to a point where she realized that she was able to? She certainly got the upper hand in that relationship, and so she was going to ride the coattails.
Absolutely, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I remember at the time, when the Monica thing came down. Chelsea was the only person that didn't really know what was going on. I knew who Monica was. I knew what was happening 2 years prior to this, and so did Hillary. Hillary later wrote in her book that she had no idea what was going on. That's complete BS, because she knew from the very beginning what was happening. In fact, she was the one that actually had Monica transferred from the White House over to the Pentagon prior to the whole thing going south. And I think she knew that when he got caught, if and when he got caught, that was her chance to ante up and to leverage herself, which is exactly what she did.
So, Buzz, when Monica, you were literally within 2 minutes of Bill for 2 years. So you knew his life as well as his wife did, basically, almost. So you weren't sleeping in the same room, but you were close and you were with him all the time. What was going on with Monica Lewinsky? And did you think before it became mainstream media, did you think that there was something off?
Well, I knew very early on. I can't really put my finger on it, but I think it was about 2 weeks into my time there. And I noticed that, of course, your access in the White House is all dependent on your position. So my position was like Secret Service guys. I could access the Oval Office. I could access the residence. I could be around him without anybody being concerned. And I noticed this young female intern that had the same access to the Oval Office that the rest of us had, and she wasn't even working in the White House. She was working in the old Executive Office building, which was across the street. So I asked the Secret Service guy, I said, "Hey, what's up with this? Who's this girl, and what's going on?" He goes, "Well," he says, "Man, don't go there. This is that's presidential best friend type material, and you don't want to ask any questions. Just let it go." And so like he kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, that kind of thing. So I knew like within 2 weeks, I knew what was going on. And I would see her around from time to time, again, in the Oval Office in the West Wing, which is not where she belonged. And of course, then Hillary had her transferred to the Pentagon, which didn't really stop her because when Hillary would go on trips, she'd come back over on weekends and be around him. And I'd see her and him in the Oval. And when Hillary was back at home, he had to be, on his best behavior. But when Hillary was on flying around the world doing her first lady stuff, Monica was around frequently.
Interesting. So, okay, let's get into Title 10, Section 892, failure to obey order of regulation or regulation. This is a pretty stern title to your book, Dereliction of Duty. And are you saying that the former president, then president, could be and should be tried for dereliction of duty?
No, that's the UCMJ. That's the Uniform Code of Military Justice phrase. And as a military guy, I use all my books talk about are from a standpoint of what a military officer sees and is what American citizens should expect from our commander in chief. So all my books are titled something that comes out of the UCMJ in terms of discipline. My point in dereliction of duty was the fact that we had a commander in chief who, in my opinion, is an Air Force officer. I don't write about Monica Lewinsky at all in my books, actually. I keep this very, very objective in terms of, here's the commander-in-chief. Here's a young Air Force officer and a pilot who's working for the commander-in-chief, and these are the many ways that he let us down in terms of national security. I talk about the times we had a chance to capture or kill bin Laden. I talk about the time that President Clinton actually lost the nuclear codes. I talk about the time that, there's so many situations, Ian, where I was a part of watching him fail to be a commander and take decisive action.
Okay, so let's wait, before heading into this, when you met with Panetta and you accepted the job and you went in, let's go with the first couple months and let's contrast for a moment what you were expecting what you were expecting the president, what kind of life you expected him to be living versus what you actually experienced. How did that contrast?
That's a really good question. I would say that I was walking in the first day, extremely overwhelmed with the responsibility. The nuclear football basically is the satchel which allows the commander in chief, no matter where he is in the world, to either initiate nuclear war or to respond to nuclear war. So to me, it was a very sobering, from day one, very sobering obligation. So I walked in the White House, just making sure I didn't mess up. I wanted to make sure that if it came down to the balloon, rising, that I would be able to hop to and do the right thing. But I also expected, I think that was the first disappointment I had, Ian, was walking into the White House and just seeing how chaotic it was. Coming out of an Air Force squadron and an Air Force wing where everything is so buttoned up and disciplined and everybody knows their rank and their position in life and what their responsibilities. And then walking into the White House and seeing just how freaking chaotic it was. It was like, oh my God, this is the most important building in the world. I'm working for the most important man in the world. And this is what we have.
Was it like an animal house? Animal House?
Sometimes it was. It literally could be. It was just, again, a lot of times it depended on whether Hillary Clinton was around or not. If she wasn't around, it was sometimes a free-for-all, and especially on Air Force One. Air Force One would be a huge party if Hillary wasn't on board. Now, I couldn't partake, but everybody else did because I was in uniform with the football. But I remember this is a funny story. I remember one time we were taking off in Air Force One at Andrews Air Force Base, and President Clinton had grabbed one of the food trays out of one of the galleys. He was surfing down the corridor of the airplane on the takeoff, which violates every single FAA regulation there is in the book. But that's how this guy was. So every day Ian was a different. Some days were a lot of fun. Some days were really, really dark. Especially after the Monica thing happened, it was just a really dark place to work, and people were very depressed and unhappy. And we knew going into the impending impeachment, it wasn't going to be a happy place.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's go back to the nuclear football. This is walk us through that experience that you had with the president. What that was like. You take us there. Kind of they call this whole kind of scenario of causing you to write this book. What was that? What did that look like?
Okay, so the military aide is up close and personal with the president 24/7, no matter where in the world. I mean, Marine One, Air Force One. You're kind of his sidekick in case stuff goes south with the military or nuclear threats. And again, I mean, I was in charge of or operationally in charge of all the military assets, which is huge. So I arrived there. Again, I'll be honest with you. I was apolitical. They asked me during my interview, my 3-day interview process, if I had voted for President Clinton. I said no. I said, quite frankly, I didn't vote for anybody. Nice. I was just an Air Force pilot. I'm here to serve, happy to serve, do my job. And as the days went on, the first 6 months were kind of a blur.
Okay.
But I started seeing things that were, a little bit troubling. I write about this in Dereliction, where one time the president had an opportunity to prevent Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard from massacring several thousand Kurds in the northern part of Iraq, and we had our Air Force and Navy fighter pilots and bombers in position during the night to go ahead and prevent this attack from happening. And President Clinton chose to do nothing, just like he chose. We had 8 times to either capture or kill Bin Laden in my 2 years there, and he chose every single time to do nothing. And I thought, Ian, if you're a commander in the military, in the Air Force, you've got, you have scant little time in the fog of war to make decisions. And by not making a decision, you're making a decision. And he chose every time to do the most politically expedient thing, in my opinion. And that's why I call it dereliction of duty. If I had been a commander in the Air Force, as I was, and had refused to respond to threats, and say, I flew in the Bosnian War, for example. If I had refused to respond to threats in Bosnia and not reacted with my men and airplanes, I could have been held derelict of duty. So that's where this comes from, right from the heart of a military guy trying to explain to the 99% of us in this country who don't have military connections, what the military goes through on a daily basis and what we should not only expect but demand from a commander in chief.
And Buzz, have you had a chance to speak to Bill about the book that you've written about him?
I have not spoken to him directly. This is a funny story also, Ian. My wife and I used to get Christmas cards from the Clintons every Christmas, and the book came out and those stopped coming. So I'm pretty sure that I bet you, knowing him and knowing her today, if I saw him somewhere, he'd go, let's go have a beer.
Yeah.
Knowing her, she'd slit my throat.
But this is like a major thing. So what happened? Was it the Lewinsky scandal came out, and then you're sitting with Bill in the Oval Office, and you're asking him if he has the code or whatever it is. Right. Walk us through that. What did that look like?
Yeah, so the nuclear football is it's the satchel that has everything the commander in chief needs, with the exception of a credit card sized document, which is actually the nuclear codes, which every president since Eisenhower is carried, because that's how the president can then authenticate himself or verify himself to the Pentagon in a very quick manner to make nuclear attacks happen.
And what is it? Is it fingerprint? What is it?
It's a credit card sized document it's a credit card sized document that you actually break open. We nickname it the biscuit because you actually break it open like a biscuit. Uh-huh. And the president then through the military aide reads a sequence of symbols and numbers. It's like a very detailed password.
Okay.
For the internet.
And this is sorry, Buzz. And this is what? This is to like literally launch a nuclear weapon?
Launch or retaliate. So let's say China or Russia launches a weapon on us, and we have 10, 15 minutes to respond. We would have to let the president would respond. He would have to reply to that. Or if we wanted to initiate an attack, he would be the guy that initiated it. So he would be talking to me. I'd be talking to the Pentagon. The Pentagon, the National Military Command Center, would make sure that the codes that he has match the codes that they have, so that they know, in fact, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it is in fact the commander-in-chief. So it's not some rogue person trying to launch nuclear weapons. And the process works very, very well. Unfortunately, President Clinton lost those codes, and we were without that capability. I didn't know this at the time, Ian. In fact, I asked him, how long has it been since you've last seen them? I mean, we turned the White House upside down looking for these things. Again, it's about the size of a credit card or a wallet-sized document. And he said, I can't remember. I said, has it been days? He goes, I don't know. I said, weeks? He said, I don't know. I said, it's been months? He goes, I just can't tell you. So theoretically, I'm not sure. I'm not going to blame him for all 3 months, but we do this about quarterly. So there was a potential, Ian, that we didn't have the ability to respond for 2 to 3 months, potentially. It could have been less than that, but the fact that he had no idea how long it had been or when he'd last seen him, to me, was shocking and telling. And just one more of those dominoes that fell where I thought, geez, this guy's not equipped. He can't do this.
And Robert, how long was it into your 2 years with the White House that you realized that the president was without these codes? When was this?
This was the same day that Monica Lewinsky hit the national press. If you remember, there was rumblings of the Paula Jones testimony, and there was rumblings. I mean, Matt Drudge was carrying it, I think, a few days prior to that. And then finally, the morning of, in fact, it was the morning in January, I believe it was January 21st of 1998, and I was the first person on his schedule that morning to, again, brief him on the process, ask him questions about the military, if he had any questions about the military, make sure that he actually had the nuclear weapons, or the nuclear codes, and that's when he confessed. I mean, he had just found out that morning that it hit the national press. So I walk in the Oval Office, and here he is. He's got his head in his hands. He's white as a ghost. You can tell he's been up all night long, knowing this is going to happen. And so I walk in the morning. I was first guy on the schedule, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I say, "Okay, sir, this is not a good time. I understand that because I had seen the headlines that morning." And I said, "I can come back later for your quarterly briefing. Just if you can just show me the nuclear codes, I'll be on my way." And he said, "Well, I don't have them. I'll get them back to you later. I'll show them to you later. Come back this afternoon." So I said, "Okay, sir, I'll do that." So I came back a few hours later, and that's when he confessed that he had, in fact, did not know where they were. We launched this massive, search in the White House. Never did find them, and I had to call the Pentagon and say, "Hey, the president's lost the codes. We need to regenerate them," which that process did not exist at the time. So they had to jump through hoops to somehow get all these codes out to all the submarines and missile silos and fighter squadrons around the world with the new code, so that they knew that this was in fact the president. So that was not a small undertaking. So that was in January of 1998.
Now, Buzz, what was the protocol? This wasn't something that you would do with the president on a daily basis. I mean, this is like basically the height of national security here, right?
Yeah, we would do it quarterly. It's kind of a classified thing and how frequently we would do it, but it was roughly every 3 months we would do it. And, he would always have a few questions about the process. And about once a year, we would actually exercise. We would actually do a fake drill where we would have, he would have a need to, or reason to actually, initiate a simulated launching or an exercise launching. We weren't going to obviously do it, but we would go through all the processes, all the communications with all the commanders around the world through the Pentagon, and he would be there and he would be talking to me, and we would do this about once a year. But I would ask him about the codes. I don't know. It wasn't an everyday thing. I would say probably every 3 to 4 months. I would just inquire. He would schedule me. I'd come in. Normally be about 15 minutes of his time because he was a very busy man, and I would go back to my office, and that would be that. So it really caught me off guard that the morning that I did come in there, and I was floored. I mean, it had never happened before, and it has never happened again. So that's how important those things are, and how essentially, I don't want to dramatize this, Ian, but it really is probably the most important military document in the history of mankind, if you think about it. It's the key to the arsenal. So it's not something you take lightly.
Yeah. I mean, this is very surprising. Is this how? Is this currently for instance, Donald Trump? Does he have the same or it's very similar nuclear football?
Yes. He probably has the exact same process. The nuclear football is, I have not talked to the current military aides. I'm a little bit out of that loop now, but I know there's still 5 of them, one from each service. There's always a senior one, I was the senior guy for my 18 months or 2 years there. So it's the same process, same football, same contents. There's a lot more in the football that I can go into. So the obvious thing is the nuclear aspect, but there's a lot more in there that the president has to have to be the commander in chief, no matter where he is. And I guarantee you today, I'm 100% sure that the guys and girls with Donald Trump have the exact same contents that I had.
And did the Pentagon change anything up after the, what I'll say, snafu with Bill? Is there any protocol change? Maybe it's classified, but did they change anything? Was anything learned from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not in my time there. I mean, I can't. Again, I left about a year after that. Not in my time. In fact, we kind of kept. In fact, one of the things that Bill Clinton told me, he asked me, he said, his overarching concern was that story not get out to the press. And he asked me to promise him I would never tell that story while he was president. And I honored that promise and never told that story until he was out and I was out. So that's why I included it in Dereliction Duty, because I think it's an important story. I think it's important that we understand, how close we were to a potential catastrophe. But I'm just guessing. I'm speculating here, Ian. But I don't think anything's probably changed. There might be a little tighter control on the president and those codes, because I know personally when I was there, President Clinton kept them rubber banded. He didn't carry a wallet. He didn't like wallets, so he kept the codes rubber banded to his credit cards in his pant pocket. And so he would put them on his bedside table at night and just leave them there when he would sleep. And so he has valets that work in the residence upstairs. And they would make sure that he had those when he was walking out. I don't know how the ball got dropped over those 2 or 3 months, but it did.
It's just astonishing. So it costs you a yearly Christmas card, but it's yeah. It's again. I guarantee you, if I saw him today in a bar, he'd be all hugs and grins and stuff. But I don't think she'd be anywhere near that polite. And then we're looking at something called the broomstick one. That kind of That's go ahead. That's what people. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when I left the White House and I went to fly commercially for Delta Airlines, and I started writing books, as you know. And for my third book called War Crimes, I embedded myself in Iraq and was with as a journalist. And I was with the Army and Navy guys and Marines and hanging out at different bases in Iraq. And so Hillary Clinton just decides that she's running for the Senate. She's a senator actually. So she decides to pay a surprise visit to the base I was at, the military base in Iraq. And I remember going into the dining hall and hearing all these troops talking about, oh my God, here comes Broomstick One. So that was the airplane that Hillary was on. They nicknamed it Broomstick One. And the funny thing too, Ian, was that they had to force people to actually have lunch with her. Nobody wanted to eat with her or sit around her, and the commanders had to order people to sit with her and be cordial, and she of course went right to the front of the line and ordered her food in front of about 200 people, which didn't surprise me either. But Broomstick One was Hillary's airplane.
Buzz, in your opinion, who was Bill's closest confidant while you were there with him? Who did you feel that he trusted the most?
There were 2 guys, and I hope you can remember their names because they were pretty prominent at the time. Vernon Jordan, who was an attorney in Washington, D.C., a really close friend of his and golfing partner. He was an attorney in D.C., and Vernon was the guy that ended up getting Monica out of Dodge and getting her a job in New York City. And the other guy was a guy named Bruce Lindsay. He was Governor Clinton's legal counsel in Little Rock during the Little Rock days, and he got brought to the White House with Clinton. And so Bruce Lindsay was around all the time. He was kind of the keeper of the closet skeletons. So those 2 guys were the 2 guys I think that Bill leaned on the most. Of course, then he had all of his, his Clintonista. He had Lanny Davis, and he had Paul Begala, and he had Rahm Emanuel. He had his little hit team of guys that's still out there moving and shaking. I mean, Michael Cohen's attorney now is Lanny Davis, so that tells you what's going on there.
Now, what about your perception? Did you ever feel like Bill was making decisions specifically to sympathize or make one particular group feel good, or rather was there ever any time just looking at the state of where we are politically in 2018, was there ever any time, Robert, with your time with Bill, that you felt like there may be some strings being pulled above him?
Oh yeah, I think the special interests back in those days. I mean, I think one of the beauties about Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, is the fact that he's not beholden to anybody. He basically funded his entire campaign for the most part. Clinton had to sell his soul to so many different groups to be elected than to be reelected. And one of the things when I was there, I was his call screener in the evening hours because the rest of the staff would go home. So I would get phone calls, people like Jesse Jackson or Roger Clinton or whoever, and I would put those calls through to President Clinton if he wanted to take those phone calls. And I was amazing to me how many special interest groups just rang him up constantly for favors. They had supported him and put money into his coffers, and now it was his time to pay them back. And it was, in my estimation, he really didn't have complete control in the White House. He'd really sold out in a lot of ways, and people wanted their chips repaid, and that was pretty constant. It was educational for me. As a military guy, I didn't have any political experience, but it was amazing to me just how deeply invested unions are, nonprofits are. The Black Congress, Congressional Congress is, the NEA, National Education Association. So people like that, the politicians that get to that position, for the most part, are really beholden to a lot of people, and it's kind of a sad commentary on our political system.
Was there any particular group that caught your attention as, oh wow, why? How is it? Something that caught your attention, and then the other part of that question is, was there any group internationally that surprised you that he felt beholden to?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, one of the things that was missed during the Monica Lewinsky situation, in my mind, I think the Republicans went down the wrong path with that, because at the same time, I mean, President Clinton was using the State Department to send missile technology and targeting technology to China in return for campaign funding donations. And I think that was the real crime at the time. You talk about collusion today with Russia.
Yeah.
The fact that China basically underwrote his presidency, going back to 1996, to me is that story is still yet to be told. But I was just alarmed at how much, international involvement and money that they had coming in, which would violate every single American campaign law that we currently have on the books. But it went under the radar. And so, back in '96 to the re-election campaign, he was giving technology through Loral to China, which now China has the ability to target intercontinental missiles on American shores, thanks to Loral Corporation and thanks to the Clinton administration. So that, to me, was in my time there, that was the biggest crime that I saw that went unreported.
That's interesting you say that. One of the I started this program. It's going on 2 years now, and one of the early names that kind of caught my attention is a former Stanford Hoover fellow that started talking about the parts of the machine that were involved in World War II and who was funding who and whatnot. He's actually a British-born scholar. His name's Anthony Sutton. Are you familiar with that name?
I've heard the name. I don't know much about him, but I actually have heard that name.
So what's interesting is that from Anthony Sutton, I was led to a guy named Carroll Quigley. Are you familiar with that name?
I am not.
So Carroll Quigley, from my understanding, was the main mentor Mr. Clinton while at Georgetown. And so, one of the reasons I'm asking these questions in regards to who he may have felt beholden to, specifically internationally, is because Sutton gets into a lot of that, and of course he traces back through Bush and then the Rockefeller family and things of that nature. But
right.
there's different, we're all part of the human species, so we're all tied to each other one way or the other. But certainly some of us are tied closer to others than others are. So Carroll Quigley influenced Bill, and then there's also the fact that, and this kind of goes back to the reason I was asking this question, is because Bill had spent time at Oxford. So
right.
Wondering if there was ever in your kind of small talk with the president, did he ever talk about any of his relationships at Oxford or any of the people he knew in England?
No, he didn't. We would talk about, for the most part, when he and I were just kind of bantering while we jogged or on the golf course. He would ask me a lot of military questions. What did I think about this capability? What's going on in Bosnia? I mean, I wasn't his primary military advisor by any stretch, because he had the Joint Chiefs, but I was the guy around him most of the time that could answer a lot of those questions. So he would talk about that. I mean, Hillary was probably one of the more. She would expound on her past, Wellesley, her influences more than he did. I think Bill was more all about, his presidency, his legacy. The past for him, I think, was not as important. But I think Hillary was much more in tune and much more threaded to how she had been raised, over the years in terms of Wellesley, and then being part of the Watergate investigation and her anti-war efforts and those kind of things. So she was more philosophical. He was more pragmatic, in my experience.
Let me throw another name out there here for you, Buzz, because you would travel with the Clintons and you're right next to him. How about Jeffrey Epstein? Did that name ever cross dialogue?
Yeah, yes, it did.
What was the relationship with Clinton and Epstein?
They were fairly close. I mean, one of the things that I was not intimately involved with, but because I lived in the White House with him, I would see the comings and goings of a lot of people. I mean, a lot of Hollywood types would come through. Harvey Weinstein was there frequently. Epstein was there. So I would happen to notice, because I would see the presidential daily schedule every single day.
Yeah,
I had it on my phone, and I had it on my. There was I'm not sure they still have it, but there was like back in those days before computers were, all that advanced. We had like TV screens in the corner of each offices that would tell you, where it was, who was coming, what the schedule was for that day, and it would give you kind of a blow by blow and who was going to be there. And Epstein would be there frequently. I'm off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many times I saw his name up there.
Yes,
I did at the time. It didn't really play with me. It does now. But I do recall seeing it, probably more than 2 or 3 occasions, but I can't be. 20 years ago, I can't go. I just really can't recollect that far.
Did you ever? You never met him? Did you ever meet?
I don't think so. I was involved in some of those things. I mean, they used to have movie nights downstairs. We had a movie theater in the White House, and the president would do. He would get like first run films before they hit the theaters, and so I would go downstairs sometimes, just poke in there and see what's going on and who was there. But I might have run across him then. I can't. I mean, I met Tom Hanks and
cool. He's from the Bay Area.
Gwyneth Paltrow and a lot of people like that. I mean, but I can't remember meeting Epstein by name. I probably did.
Right.
But I would just shake their hand and get out of there. I mean, that wasn't my job to be part of the moving and shaking crowd. I was just there to be entertained for a while. So, because my if nothing was going on, if we weren't traveling, quite frankly, I was up in my office or down in my bedroom, so I was just kind of hanging out.
Let me ask you another question. Herbert Raymond McMaster, he came out with a book, I think it was about 5-6 years before you came out with your book, but the books have the same title, Dereliction of Duty. Are you familiar with that book?
Yes, H.R. McMaster, you bet.
And what do you think about his stance on going after Lyndon B. Johnson and McNamara? Was it McNamara at the time?
It was Robert Strange McNamara. Yeah, I think it's a good book. I've never met HR myself. I've got friends that have worked for him in the Army, specific directly.
Yeah.
I admire the guy. I remember that when my book came out after the fact, you can't copyright book titles. That's one of the things that you can't copyright song titles. You can't copyright book titles. So I remember when my publisher recommended that name, I said, well, there's already one out there. He goes, yeah, but that doesn't matter. Yours is going to be much bigger anyway. And don't worry about it. So I remember that. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I remember that at one point in time, McMaster's attorney called the publishing attorney and kind of, had a little beef. And my publishing attorney, I didn't have one at the time, but the publisher said, well, you can't copyright that. You should know that. You're an attorney. And if anything happens, you're probably going to get a bump in the sales from Buzz's book. So I wouldn't complain. So, which is exactly what happened. So people were going on to Amazon and mistaking the two books and buying his book instead of mine.
Yeah.
I think like I said, I think he's a brilliant war fighter, and I've got friends that work for him directly and love the guy. He didn't fare too well working in the Trump administration as the NSC guy. But
right.
No ill wishes. I think his book's good. It's totally different than what I write about. Same title, but again, I just think that it's unfortunate that we both wrote books about different things with the same title, but that wasn't my call. That's my publisher.
That's interesting. Yeah, but that's very interesting. So, Buzz, tell us about your next project. Where your career is headed from here. Tell listeners about what you're doing now.
Oh my God, I'm not sure what I'm going to do when I grow up, Ian. I'm still out there working. I've got a website, buzzpatterson.live. I do a lot of speaking. Around the country, primarily to conservative groups, some corporations, and a lot of universities. Believe it or not, I get on a lot of campuses to talk about the conservative approach from the military perspective.
Yep.
I've got that going on. So I've also got a TV gig that I'm working on right now. It's an internet thing right now, but it's supposed to go cable satellite. I can't talk about that just yet, but soon.
Okay.
I do a military show called Power and Patriots, which is on Your Voice America network, cool. And it's going to be one of those that might be going to the cable. And it's a real military show by the military for the military. I've got a great group of co-hosts, and we talk about today current news. Current international relations, national security affairs, military affairs, from 3 former military officers, Army, Navy, and Air Force. So we go after it. We don't hold anything back. We tackle them, PC or not. We tackle the Pentagon. We go after the Pentagon and a lot of things. And so I've got that going on. I'm working on my 5th book right now. It's a great story. I can't talk about that yet, but I'm about halfway through that. So it's a lot happening, man. I retired from Delta in 2016, and I've gotten back to primarily speaking. I guess right now my biggest thing is traveling around the country, speaking to organizations, corporations, and Republican groups. That keeps me busy, and I've got three young kids and a wife at home, so I've got to take care of those.
That sounds awesome, man. It sounds like you're in the midst of your best career yet.
I think so. I'm older, a little bit older, but not too old. So my wife and kids keep me young, and so I'm not flying 3 weeks out of every month with Delta Airlines. I get to do a lot more of the stuff I enjoy, which is doing stuff like this with you. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Buzz, thanks for coming on the Winwood Radio and joining Discussing the Truth and bringing us some solid cuts from the buzzsaw. And Robert, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. It was my privilege. I wouldn't change a single day. I really enjoyed it. I hope I'm still serving out there for the nation and trying to make sure that we go forward in a positive direction.
All right, man. Until next time, thank you.
Take care. See ya.
Ladies and gentlemen, retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Buzz Patterson. I mean, dude, that's about as close as you can get to a former president that exists. You can't get much closer. Why? Because not only was he basically the right-hand man of Mr. Clinton, for President Clinton, for 2 years, but he was the link between Clinton and the Pentagon, in as much as knowing the whereabouts of the nuclear football. Buzz Patterson, you have joined Windward Radio. I am Ian Hamilton Trottier. This is your Wednesday edition, as always, of Discussions of Truth. Thanks for tuning in. And I'll be right back for some closing remarks.
Go. Don't let me go. This the part when the heart starts shifting. This the part when the love go missing. This the part. This the part. This the part when the heart starts shifting. This the part when the love go missing.
I love Metallica. Yeah, speaking of the Bay Area, if you caught that, Buzz put in Tom Hanks in there, Gwyneth Paltrow, and I kind of slipped it in there, but Tom Hanks was born in Pleasant Hill, to the best of my knowledge. He actually went to a high school in Oakland called Skyline High School. A member of my family actually happened to also go to that school. And Travis Air Force Base is an Air Force base that I am very familiar with. If you know my roots, they do root back to the Bay Area. Robert Patterson's roots actually started in North Carolina, and he didn't go into a story here today, but there is an interesting story about the misuse of taxpayer money that Hillary Clinton made. Basically, Buzz scramble a jet back, I'm not sure where it was, Andrews Air Force Base, but they had just left Hilton Head, South Carolina, headed down to, I think it was St. Thomas, and they scrambled a jet just to pick up, just to make sure that the daughter, Clinton's daughter, Chelsea, her books would arrive in St. Thomas because she had forgotten them. That would be Chelsea. And yeah, interesting enough, I lived in Mountain View, California, for right next to Moffett Air Force Base, former Air Force Base, Moffett Field they call it. I lived there for a couple of years, and I saw the Clinton motorcade at least once as they had gone into Mountain View to drive up to Palo Alto to visit Chelsea, either take Chelsea back to school at Stanford. Quite possible that Lieutenant Colonel was actually in that motorcade. So this is a number of years ago. This is easily 20 years ago. Well, just about 20 years ago. Anyway, another incredible show. I can't tell you enough how much I love doing this for you and for me and for America and for this country and for this world. Because what we do here is a classic example of an expression of freedom of speech. Freedom of press. This is it. This is it right here, folks. Right here. This is free press. Unfiltered, unedited, raw, and uncut. This right here. And this whole segment will get posted to iTunes, to Google Play. We'll get thread back into the internet for folks, everyday folks to listen to. We've been very fortunate on this show, which originated as the Florida Sun and Spray Show. Again, I started this because I started looking into the Zika virus. I love my country. No, I never joined the military. I've thought about it. I was very close a number of times. Very close to becoming a Marine at one point. Very close to becoming, actually joining the Air Force. And very close, probably closest to joining the Coast Guard. It doesn't matter what branch. What branch of defense. I love this country. And I want to make sure that this country remains a beacon of hope and a standard of liberty and freedom for generations to come. But as you know, since you're most likely listening to me, you know that is in great jeopardy. So it's up to you and it's up to me to continue to dig. And fortunately, we've got people like Robert Patterson digging as well. But look, Cynthia McKinney, 6-term Congresswoman, John Perkins, former economic hitman, Stephen Kinzer, former New York Times correspondent. These are the folks that have graced the airwaves here at Wynwood Radio on this program. Currently known as Discussion of Truth. It's been that way for a number of months. We dropped the Florida Sun and Spray show probably a year ago. Next week, as I mentioned, Alana Freeland. She digs deep into what's called geoengineering. The documents prove it. It's shown. It's happening. This is happening. So what is happening? That's what we ask. And Elena believes she's got a pretty good idea. So what she does is she portrays her research into her book called Under an Ionized Sky, and she threads HARP and SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, into geoengineering. Is there a thread between those three entities and elements? Is there a thread? Don't forget, JFK, John F. Kennedy, put her in the spotlight. She literally reminded the former president of his wife, as a younger version of his wife, back in 1963. So she'll be joining us next week. Got a lot of new guests coming on board, and the show continues to grow. And support it. You're already supporting it by listening, and donate to it. Donate in any way you like. 5 cents, $5, $50, whatever you want. $500. Okay? Got a lot of things we're working on. Urge you to look into my book, Freedom Reserved, No More Lies. And until next week, again, my name is Ian Hamilton Trottier. You can follow me on Twitter, handle IANTROTTIER. Follow me on Instagram, same handle. Go out and buy Buzz's book. Drop him a line. We're all in this together. And I thank you for tuning in. I will talk to you in 7 days' time. Let's hit the lights and be awesome.